Night falls on the golden age of humanity. Sons shall turn upon their father, and his worlds drown in blood. The eye shall open, and the galaxy will burn. Join us, listeners. We go into the canon lore of the Forge World Black Books on Heresy Grad School. Professors Jason, Patrick, and Dave, myself, will dive into the lore of the Black Books and the Black Library novels that we know and love, and explore the heresy as history. So, get a coffee, get your notebook out, and prepare to explore heresy as history with us on Heresy Grad School.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of Heresy Grad School. Here with Professors Jason, Dave, and myself, Patrick. We're finishing up our coverage on Knights from Book 4. Got a bunch of really cool stuff to talk about. And we're going to start off with household ranks with Dave. And then we're going to go into House Maccabeus with Jason. And then I'm going to finish up with Veroni. So without further ado, Dave?
Yeah, so this has been a really, really fun deep dive for me, and I know Jason has enjoyed it as well. So we're going to say a fond farewell to Knights for, I think, the immediate time being, but I'm sure we will revisit them at some point in the future as we kind of go off and look for other dark areas of the galaxy to explore. It does feel like we hit this at sort of the perfect moment, though, man. I just got my issue of White Dwarf, the March issue, and there's a whole section on a vassal household of knights attached to Legio Invigliata. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to look at that yet.
No, not yet.
It's really cool. So, but yeah, so the vassal household that's attached to Legio Invigliata is basically knights that have been seconded. So it's a little bit different spin on like the Procon Vi knights that come out of the Forge world of Procon, right? So they're not just being mass produced. So they're being like, let's say by the, ones and twos and threes, they show up and they are basically, they're seconded. They're basically, given official orders to join the Legio in defense of the Legio, and then they adopt their heraldry, right? They adopt their banners, and so it's pretty cool. It's just another way to look at knights on the battlefield attached to Titan legions. It's very different than the Sidon protocols that we looked at the very beginning of this, and then some of the other Imperial Knight households. So much variety, man. It's very cool. But without further ado, what I really wanted to talk about before we close this out, man, is the household ranks. So we know, and we've talked about knights being extremely sort of stratified, I think, in their culture and their knight households, right? It's very very focused on the caste system and bloodlines and everything. So in the back of the book, it tells you how to build a Questoris Knight Crusade army list, but I'm not going to talk about rules. What I want to talk about is the different ranks that are sort of associated with those positions on the battlefield. And the first one is the Knight Seneschal. And the Knight Seneschal is the apex of the order of knights. So it is a commonly referred to title, and it's conferred either to the head of a particular household or that household's mustered forces on the battlefield. But usually it's a title that's given and confers with its symbolic authority And then that night, and the scion that pilots that night has overall tactical command of the battlefield, at least in terms of the knights. The role of the seneschal also involves sort of understanding the strengths and the natures of the forces of the Imperium, as well as the dangers that lie beyond in the cold stars and the foes that await there. So it's a title that's not given lightly. It's a title that's earned in blood on the battlefield. And so these seneschals would have had a lot of experience fighting sort of the foes of the Great Crusade. And so they're really good, obviously. On the battlefield, and on the tabletop, they do well too. One thing I should say before we go down any further is the term scion. The term scion simply refers to a noble. So essentially, any noble that is in a knight chassis or a knight armor is a scion. So it actually doesn't have a specific rank in and of itself. It just sort of denotes the fact that you're of noble bloodline and you are a pilot of a knight suit or a knight armor. So the other title we have here in terms of sort of the command and control structure of a knight banner is a lord scion. So this is a term that's collective, but it also encompasses all of the upper echelons of a Questoris Knight Crusade force. So it could be a baron, it could be a margrave, it could be a Ciridor count, a thane, right, Pat? I think that's what your knight household would refer to it as, right?
Chieftain.
Chieftain, yeah.
Yep.
So the term Lord Scion is not a demonstrative in terms of being everywhere. There are local variations that mean sort of the same thing, but it denotes sort of in peerage and rank, you are the supreme authority below a seneschal on the battlefield. They are war-tempered veterans whose position has not simply been bought with age and lineage, but with blood and fire upon the battlefield. Lord Scion's mettle and record are known to all under their command, just as it is blazoned by the heraldry that adorns their knight armor, an open challenge to any who would oppose them. So those two ranks, the seneschal and the Lord Scion, make up the sort of the command and control of a knight banner on the battlefield. And then you get into some of the more specified battlefield roles. So you have a knight preceptor, and a knight preceptor is a knight that I think my house, right? So House Orlok would have a large number of preceptors because they are knights that have displayed a particular faculty for technology. Sometimes they serve as sacristans. Sometimes they serve alongside sacristans, but they're always sort of learning about the inner workings of the Throne Mechanicum and the knights. And so they have some very particular talents. They make really good instructors to the household aspirants, which are the sort of the young bloods, the up and coming nobles. And they have a deeper understanding of sort of what the knight armor is in terms of what it's capable of. And so it's a cool rank. It's a cool sort of identity within a knight banner and a household. And often they become sort of lore keepers, and they're the keepers that allow the technology and the maintenance of the knight suits and the auspex equipment and everything that goes, the weapon systems, everything that goes with a knight to sort of survive through the generations. So they're pretty cool. And then you've got a rank that I could not find an analog to this in any history, right? So it's a knight octelaire, and that is not a word that exists in the English language or any other language, French, German, Norse, that I could find. So octelaire is an archaic rank whose traditions flourished in ancient days when knight houses battled bloodily for supremacy with one another. Though on many night worlds, feuds and affairs of honor were settled through highly ritualized and formalized duels, when the matter was pressed, either with bitter wrath or pure desperation of survival, and mass battle was inevitable, you'd call these guys, right? And so they would sort of serve as your champion. Like they're the guy that you call to sort of settle your score. And
So do they act as a second, or are they?
Yeah, yeah,
Or do they fight for you, so like you don't fight yourself?
yeah. No, I think you're right, Pat. I think they would act as they would act as your champion in matters of honor, and when like total warfare between knight households would probably result in like mutually assured destruction that would not have benefited anybody. Then you call these guys, right? And they're pretty badass. They're also sort of like borderline, like uh, they're they're willing to do things that other people are not willing to do. So they are like in the Great Crusade, they were the ones that would just do it. They would do what it took to win, right? So desperate tactics. They would do things that other knights probably due to honor and protocol would not do. But these were the guys that were like, these are the guys you broke glass on, right?
Right.
So they're pretty cool. I think it's a really cool idea. In gameplay, when you set these guys up, I know we're not going to talk about rules, but you pick an enemy, and then that's the enemy on the table that you try to take down. So that kind of gives you some idea of who these guys are. And then
it's like a preferred enemy kind of thing, right?
It's more like you select an individual target on the battlefield rather than you would get preferred enemy everything, right? Like preferred enemy infantry, preferred enemy. Like you actually pick a model, and then that's the one you go after.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, they're pretty badass. And then there's this little call out box which I really want to focus on because it's interesting. It's a legendary Freeblade, and it says, drawn out from the ranks of their former households, either willingly owing to the lure of adventure or the unquenchable lust for battle, or unwillingly as an outcast, renegade, or last survivor. Freeblades are knights mendicant, owing no allegiance and no fealty. Of these, many were drawn to the Great Crusade, lured by the thirst for glory or the unceasing clangor of war on the frontier, joining the Questoris Crusade forces and fighting on countless worlds in support of the Emperor's great work. So what's really cool about this is within a knight banner, within a knight household, you absolutely can include free blades of either your own choosing or legendary free blades. It's interesting in the rules here, and I don't think anybody that I've talked to has actually noticed this, but it seems like Forge World was making sort of an allowance to include legendary Freeblades that had rules. So like a character knight. We haven't seen one of those in 30K yet, but there are quite a few of them in 40K. And so I hope, this is sort of my private, right? My wishes and desires, right? Like I hope we see some character knights in 30K. That would just be super fucking badass.
I mean, there's certainly enough like color panels in all the books, not just book 4, but there's enough out there to make sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we'll see. Maybe we'll get some unique rules and character knights down the way, because it seems like at least on page 296 in book 4, Forge World has specifically made a special place for those guys in a Knight Questoris household. So now we get into sort of the standard troop ranks, and you have a Scion Marshal. And a Scion Marshal is basically you're going to be your footmen, right? Your battle line. They make up the main strength of the household banners. They're experienced in warfare, and they know how to use their machines. So they're going to make up the bulk of your knight banner. And then you have the Scion Aspirant, who is sort of your new your new scion. They haven't been blooded in war yet. They may be this may be their first time on the battlefield. So what I really like about this is the rules allow for you to bring basically like a noob onto the battlefield, right? it's so cool. So these they have they've got some weaknesses, right, associated with them. And I think it's really cool that you're allowed to bring these troops onto the battlefield in a Night Banner, so that you can kind of have that thematic and narrative experience of, oh yeah, I'm going to play my young blood, right? Maybe he's the grandson of the seneschal or the Lord Scion, right? Maybe she's the granddaughter of the of the head huntress or something. So
Baby's first knight chassis, right?
Well, we haven't. Well, we're not quite there. Baby's first knight chassis. Glad you brought that up. So we did get some rules, and they're still, I think, quote unquote experimental.
Mm-hmm.
But we got some rules for the armatures, right? And in the armature rules, it specifically calls out a new troop rank, which is Scion Auxilia. I'll just read this here. So the warriors that are most often recruited from outside of a household's core bloodline serve as pilots of armature frames. So these could be distant cousins of the nobility. They could be warriors that proved their valor at a tournament, or even potentially really impressive prisoners that were captured on the battlefield, and then you wanted to put their talents to use, but you didn't want to give them a full knight armor. So it's a rank that's outside of the bloodline, but it is still a troop rank that you could see within a Night Banner, and they're not as many in number, right? So they would be few in number, opposed to a Scion Marshal or a Scion Aspirant. But a Scion Auxilias did take to the battlefield as part of Night Banners, and it was often like their reckless bravery that defined them during battle. So I think that was very cool that we got a new rank in the Questoris Knight household. Not just a new chassis, right? So the new chassis is another thing, but we actually got a new rank to include in the Knight households. So that's pretty cool. So then we go on to some of the fast attack ranks, but these, those are terms that are made to fit in game. But what I think they really are in terms of knight ranks is these are sort of the far riders, right? These are the ones that are scouting out alongside the battlefield. So the first one is a Scion Dolores. And this is a title that was bestowed on knights who were famous for slaying beasts, and on their homeworlds would probably have gone out and taken down some of the large fauna that was out there. And so the epithet is Dolores. It's an ancient tongue encoded to the great arcs which bore the knights to their founding world. And it means grievous or mournful in its true form. But within the society of knights, it has grown to have a double-edged meaning. Scions who have proved themselves time and again against the mega predators which populate many of the night worlds, gaining for themselves a tally of trophies and kill worthy of their peers. It also implies one perhaps to whom battle and slaughter have become an addiction to the exclusion of all else, and for whom life beyond the confines of knight armor is a pale and hollow thing, and mortal danger their only wine and meat. So these guys, they're the ones out there roaming around the edges of the battlefield looking for the big kill. I imagine these as being Cerastus Knight Lancers who are trying to outflank like a warhound, and that's what they want to take down. They want to take down the fucking Titan, right?
Right.
They're going after the big predator, the apex predator. That's what they're going after. So they're a little unbalanced, right? There's some significant risk in here. But so the way it fits into the household rank is, they want to be forward deployed. They want to be at the forefront of battle. They're often going to charge ahead of the main battle line or the main banner. And some of their peers might think, yeah, this guy's like maybe a little suicidal, right? But really, it's just these guys are driven by battle lust, and the ones that survive long enough are able to sort of control that malady, that battle lust. They're able to temper it, and so they can kind of turn it on and channel it, when they need to in battle. So that's very cool. And then you have the Scion Ulan, and the Ulan tradition is one followed by most hot-blooded and impetuous knight households. And this would be very true, I think, of the Knights pro-con, right? So the Knights in Titan Death that we learn a lot about, the pro-con, or the House Vi Knights, right? So they're just come from this sort of warrior culture, rapid victory, high speed, maneuverability, just throwing caution to the wind. They're going out there and they're used as scouts, raiders, reavers. Either they're forming the front line of skirmish or they're doing flanking forces on the open field, encircling foes, running them down. Many knights, Scions Ulan, use Cerastus pattern knights, obviously, right? Because they're superior battle speed. So a lot of the knight Scion Ulans would be in Cerastus patterns knights, castigators, lancers, those kinds of knights. All right, wrapping it up here, we have the heavy support ranks of the knight household. We have the Scion Arbalaster. Arbalasters excel at dealing death at range. Big surprise,
right?
For heavy support. So, these would be the best. These would be probably, you would see these in, right? So they're gunners. You may see them actually in some of the Questoris patterns of knights. They would lend themselves to, I think. But they're basically looking to take down big prey at range. They're the support to the battle line. They're the support to the banner. They've got the heaviest weapons, and they're screening their comrades' advance. And also, importantly, they're shielding the knight banner from aerial attack. So this is a rank inside of a knight household or inside of a banner that's very important, because if a knight household or a knight banner goes out unsupported, then the Scion Arbalaster is the one that is going to have to provide sort of that close air support, that coverage, that anti-air coverage. So that's cool. And then we have the Scion Implacable, an epithet applied to a household knight who has shown a particular aptitude for siege warfare. And Implacable is an invaluable warrior in such situations as heavy assault against fortified positions, and also in the desperate maelstrom of cityscape warfare. In situations such as these, the knight, despite its power, might become undone if it can be surrounded or swarmed by an enemy. So the Implacable is the one who's going to go out and make sure that in siege warfare or city fight, the knights are not getting encircled. They're not being trapped. So he's going to be your expert on city fighting, siege warfare, and how to take down really fortified defenses. And like everything else, I will say about these household ranks, they're more, I would say they're more sort of notional than they are defined, right? So like within every household, are you going to find these ranks? No, absolutely not, right? So within Erthagon, are you going to find all of these ranks? Probably not. In House Vi, you would find way more Scion Ulans than you would find probably Scion Arbalasters, right? So these are ranks that probably are fluid and probably applicable to households, some households more than others. But I think it's really cool that they, Forge World of Black Books, went out and sort of added this depth of character to to these night households and sort of develop this complex set of skills that, well, nobles who pilot these night chassis in night households would have, and how they come together on the battlefield, have like specific, um, you know, tactical jobs and stuff. So that's it. Turn it over, man. I've talked enough.
Dude, thanks, Dave. I mean, that was a super in-depth dive. I mean, I've always seen the ranks and, I've been like, okay, cool, I'll use these rules if I ever go to a mega battle, that kind of thing, but never like actually sat and read the blurbs about them and like actually tried to figure out, what would my house use mostly, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it was really fun to sort of pick up on some of the lore that's embedded there. So yeah, hopefully that gives people a little bit of narrative as they feel their night houses on the table. I will
Yeah, man.
look forward to seeing your night houses. Send us pictures if you guys have night houses. We've actually put this out, but like if you have full night houses or even partial night houses, like send us pictures, man. I'd love to put those up on our Facebook page.
Yeah, you got a paladin or two, or heck, like Dave was talking about with the armager, you got a paladin and a couple armagers. Shoot us a picture. We'll post it.
Yeah, that'd be super cool. Give us some fluff too.
Yeah, man. Well, Jason, I guess we're on to House Maccabeus, man.
All right, let's see if I can do these guys justice. So, Maccabeus, let me tell you about these poor sad assholes, guys. It's a sad story. Maccabeus is an enormous night house. They were at their height during the heresy. They were over 200 armors, which pretty sizable. And they were kind of driven to damnation alongside Horus through just their own need to succeed and excel. And it's kind of cool and kind of sad because they're like that perfect tragic story. But Maccabeus is originally bonded to Mezua, and if you remember these guys, we talked about them so many times throughout the length of our coverage on the Corny. They were the Forge World alongside Pandax that were both of those were stuck in Grail Abyss, and Mezua were the guys tasked with resupplying Maccabeus. So, a couple of fun things about Maccabeus. Always eager and at the front of any conflict. Overwhelming determination in the face of impossible odds. They're very instrumental and really prevalent in a lot of the imperial campaigns in the northern region. And unfortunately, it's the same drive for glory in the face of impossible odds that really set them on the path to ruin. So what's interesting is this pursuit of ideals and perfection. It's a little odd alongside the legion they eventually end up with, the Death Guard, where they finish out the heresy. So, a little bit of backstory on House Maccabeus here. Their homeworld is nestled deep within the Grail Abyss, named Baroda, and they began M30 in kind of a sorry state. There was kind of a duality of what was going on with Baroda. There were really terrible storms, even impressive for the warp storms of Old Night. It really sheltered a lot of these night worlds in the Grail Abyss, but it also really isolated them. And unlike House Veroni, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, Maccabeus was so cut off that they actually started to devolve in technology. So Baroda's natural resources were already starting to dwindle by the time they were isolated. So they were not going into Old Night at height of what they were capable of, and it really only got worse. So it's said to be a terrestrial type world with a variegated climate, and I love how they casually mention also exhibits the sordid megafauna associated with such world. So yeah, they just have dinosaurs, but It's a minor detail so far as it goes. They also have really terrible climactic storms that are just more or less constant across the world. And what's interesting is between the storms and the dwindling natural resources, it really led to frequent infighting. There are actually a lot of households on Baroda before they were rediscovered. So Maccabeus is the last surviving house by the time they were rediscovered by the Imperium. And they were really only left with a handful of knights by the time the showed up. So the strength of those other knight houses on Baroda was really drained from centuries of war, 800 years altogether, actually. And they would just, these knight houses would fling themselves into combat over the last few, like, open air mines, giant storm-proof refineries for minerals and fuel that Baroda was kind of like, it was kind of like the center of whatever remained of their natural resources and economy. And they would literally, these knight houses would extinguish entire bloodlines of nobility that lasted back hundreds of thousands of years just to get their hands, even temporarily, on some of these refineries and mines. Maccabeus, like we said, was basically the only one that survived. They destroyed their last competitor, House Wintorth, in 831-30, several decades before integration into the Imperium. And this brought an end to an 800-year civil war. Maccabeus basically rules unopposed for around 20 years. But what's interesting is they don't lose this competitive drive, this kind of hunger for glory and combat. So ritual combat starts to become even more common for rank and position. And that actually kind of draws a little bit of a parallel to the 8th Legion. The Night Lords are also really big on ritual combats for rank and position. They consider it, just as much of a viable strategy to make their way up the chain of command as anything else. So the problem is Maccabeus has conquered their own planet. They don't have a whole lot to do. Their technology has basically degraded to the point that space travel is not really viable anymore. And some of their knights, all of their knights really, they have just been repaired and put together again and again so many times over just these centuries of warfare that the ones that are left are reduced to burning fossil fuels. There's some that are powered. They're massive sheet iron welding on top of armor in ceramite and adamantium. They can no longer reproduce.
So they've turned into battle bots, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, pretty close. It's not that far. I mean, a battle bot that's like a good 40 feet tall, but still. And since they don't possess this technology to repair or rearm or do basically any of the maintenance Sacris charged with, their knights have devolved to the point where they're barely holding together. But it's really kind of interesting because you have these veteran knight scions of literal centuries of warfare that are in these knights that are barely holding together anymore. So it seems like one of the few places in the Imperium as a whole where the human element is really, really, indispensable. They're war-torn. They have hundreds of years of experience, but the equipment they have is ramshackle and barely holding together. So, Baroda is found by a comparatively small Imperial fleet, said to be barely 100 voidcraft and a company of about 1,000 Imperial ships. Baroda does not wish to acquiesce quietly and join the Imperium, even though they only have access to a very few orbital defenses, including some long obsolete missiles and servitor drones, which are pretty casually swatted aside by the fleet and Fist and drop pod. So Maccabeus again, 800-year civil war, they really have been conditioned to only expect violence from anybody that's not of the house. So, of course, the Lord Marshal of a glory and honor hungry Night House refuses to surrender even in the face of overwhelming odds. He issues a direct challenge to the Imperial Fist Huscarl company to essentially a duel and an open battle between the pride of House Maccabeus and the 1,000-man Imperial Fist company. So the Imperial Fist commander sees this as a way to avoid a protracted campaign of pacification, kind of avoid destroying all of these veteran pilots that they've just found resource of essentially a brand new Night House. And so these two sides meet under yet another big giant, world-spanning storm, and this comes to be known as the conflict at Arbor Moor. So the fists are kind of clashing against like the giant bulky iron steam and diesel-powered ramshackle knights, and it's a scary one-sided conflict. The knights are just blown apart by demolisher cannons. Terminator kicked them over. It's just bad across the board, Cabius. However, even as the Imperial Fists are, putting the boots to the medium style, the Maccabeus Scions absolutely refuse to surrender until their knights are dismantled to the point they can no longer move. So in the aftermath, Baroda and Maccabeus swore undying loyalty to the Imperium and gained the patronage, of the Mazoan Forge World, who ostensibly should re-equip and repair the household. Now, the problem with the Mazoan Forge is these warp storms have not abated as much as anybody would prefer. So Mezua has to both construct these knight armors and transport them to Baroda, and this is taking forever. Maccabeus, you got to think about this from their perspective. They're this house where glory and honor in combat is absolutely everything, and they're held back by, essentially being isolated and devolving into the point where their knights are barely functional. And they have this forge world that ostensibly should be, resupplying, revitalizing their household, and the Mazoans don't want to risk their large explorer arcs in a region of space where the warp storms are so terrible. So they're shipping over small, ones and twos of new knight armor via like little bitty cruiser instead. And to compound this problem, as soon as these armors are getting there, there's of course like instant challenge and combat over who gets the new armors and who gets stuck at home with the ramshackle diesel knights. And as soon as these newly equipped nobles are getting these these new knight armors, they're almost instantly leaving the planet and joining up with one prong or another of the Great Crusade. And this is causing a huge problem for Maccabeus and Baroda as a whole because they're essentially hemorrhaging military power. It gets so bad to the point it actually provokes the Lord Marshal, who actually managed to survive all the way through that Battle of Arbor Moor. It's a guy named Cirrus Lanthale. But he manages to survive, and he and the kind of ruling council of Baroda, a bunch of guys called the Magna Communium, they actually forbid taking up the role of Questoris, that is, going out on crusade, without the express approval from your scion's immediate liege. And this has the exact opposite effect of what they want. Instead of actually stemming the tide of knight scions picking up these brand new armors and instantly jetting out to link up with whatever part of the Great Crusade will have them, it actually forces a lot of these young nobles to ditch their vows and bonds to the house, free blade. instead of staying back at home. And so this ends up that instead of having large detachments of Maccabeus knights, many armies of the Spanish Imperium and the Crusade have small little just Maccabeus knights. So even though they're small, they rack up a very fearsome reputation as shock troops and line breakers, as befits many knights. But they are always first to volunteer for spearheads, fights against overwhelming odds. This kind of comes to their nickname, the Forlorn Hope, to crusade elements that fight beside them, kind of like a comment in respect of the value of the scions of Maccabeus. However, they did tend to gain a sort of negative reputation too for jumping from army to army, looking for those that are the most active and the most likely to enhance their own personal glory. And this is where we run into a pretty big issue, and possibly where it starts to go even further south. I mean, this isn't really the beginning of the end. Probably the beginning of the end of Maccabeus was back before Old Knight, and they were already dealing on resources. But this isn't great either. So there's a scion, dude named Markin Hrotham. He literally turns the tide of battle during pacification of a planet called Scaran. And he was fighting alongside the Luna Wolves. And this looked like it was going to be a very rare defeat for the 16th Legion. But Hrotham manages to personally destroy several giant arachnid automata of a corrupt forge crypt. And this is kind of the deed that both elevates Maccabeus to like really storied heights of honor, but also kind of damns, and it doesn't end well for anybody involved. So helping out with the Luna Wolves bring Hrotham to the direct attention of Ezekiel Abaddon, and it earns Hrotham a spot in the upper echelons of the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet, which you may remember is Horus's personal fleet. So,
woo, Sons of Horus!
Right? Still Luna Wolves at the time, but yeah, not too far off. So this is probably where Hrotham speaks to the upper elements of the Expeditionary Fleet about his languishing house back home. Speaking of which, there's kind of like a rot setting in to the scions left at home on Baroda. These poor bastards have been left by themselves. Basically, they're kind of the dregs of the house. And it's to the point where there's only a couple of dozen of them left that haven't jetted off for the crusade. Now, this is not great for Baroda as a whole. Essentially, anything useful has just immediately jumped ship and left. It's been 150 years or thereabouts after the Battle of Arbor Moor, when Hrotham gets back to the planet. Basically, everybody left bitter as hell. They're envious of the stories of the other houses kind of rising to prominence during the Crusade. Maccabeus was really stymied by their near exile, and it's a really slow trickle of new armor coming in from the Mazoan Forge. It really causes a lot of tension between some of the other knight houses, specifically Veroni. They're seen as a competitor for both their influence in the Crusade and imperial favor, as well as over the few outposts and resources in the Grail Abyss. And essentially the only reason hostilities weren't open with Veroni and Maccabeus was that in the sad state it was in, Maccabeus was really stymied by its lack of armor suitable for combat. So this is the environment Hrotham comes back into. He actually returns to the planet just a few months before Istvan III kicks off, and he manages to round up a lot of the scions that had left the world previously. So he's coming back to a planet with a bunch of young guys and girls who are looking to leave the planet and bring honor to their house. And these are a bunch of like hard-bitten, veteran scions that are coming back. They're bringing stories of the Crusade. They're coming back with war-scarred armor that has, lengthy battle honors. When they get back, they're almost immediately chastised by that Lord Marshal and Magnus Concilium. Those guys have essentially been sitting on the planet complaining for decades, where Markham is seen as like this returning hero. So when Markin gets back, they don't like the fact that he comes back with all of this honor and the promises of the War Master. However, Markin Protham finds a lot of support in these younger scions that are really eager to get out there and get the same glory these older scions are returning with. He's kind of seen as like, this rock star that appeals to the youngsters. And it's not long before he boots the old guard out of power by elimination, basically driving them into exile. And Protham creates and then takes up a brand new title of Lord Protector, kind of surreptitiously pledges his house to Horus's service. So in return, the War Master's agents start diverting supplies and knight armor to Baroda, both kind of cementing that alliance and really weakening the potential of the future loyal knight armor coming back and biting the ass. So now Lord Protector Protham sends a summons to all of Maccabeus' scions that are kind of out in the wild still to recall them to the homeworld. He's seen as this impressive figure to follow compared to the Conciliary and Lanthael, who were old and outdated. And now he's bringing these resources and this honor to the house that has never been seen before. So some of the knight scions that were attached to loyalist elements in the crusade come home, and they do not countenance the alliance with Horus. I mean, by this point, people know what's going on with Istvan III. And the loyalist elements even brand themselves the Knights of the Covenant to kind of hearken to their ties to the imperial truth and the Emperor over the War Master. So they take up arms, they seize the Black Tower, which is Baroda's astropathic sanctum. The Lord Protector leads the rest of the traitor knights on the world, along with the forces of the War Master that have been, kind of diverted there to destroy and take the tower from the Loyalists. So, like a lot of other parts of the Cornid conflict, this really goes unknown for years after the heresy. A few months later, in 006 M31, straight after Reckon Face at Istvan III, the Death Guard fleet arrives at Baroda. Baroda is expecting Horus, the War Master, the guys they pledged themselves to show up and ask for their assistance, but it's Mortarion instead. He shows up, demands Maccabeus accompany them via the War Master's own authority, and he also orders every bit of every asset and resource stripped from Baroda, human and otherwise. And Maccabeus is next seen at the massacre at Dominica Minor, which, if you guys want to go check that action out in our coronation coverage, it's a pretty big deal. So Protham is required to attend Mortarion personally, and he is never seen after they leave Baroda. Now, his personal seal accompanies Mortarions alongside every quote-unquote official decree and command to come to House Maccabeus, and even his knight can be seen in combat on several occasions. However, that knight's Mechanicum throne chamber is sealed from the outside. And now, since Maccabeus is kind of bereft of that leadership that drew them all back together, they're really forced to just accompany the 14th Legion despite the 14th's reputation towards using and expending auxiliary forces. Now, from there, you can kind of pick up with where we started talking Maccabeus in our Coronid Deeps coverage. So, for their material strength, again, we talked about how they were barely holding armors together. They were essentially amalgams of a bunch of different machines, but you have a lot of warriors with combat experience. Again, most of these people are veterans of decades and centuries of civil war, and most of these veterans will win the ritual combat to claim the armors when they trickled in from Mezua and then instantly disappear. So I worked out the math on that. By about 000 M31, it's 150 years approximately since they pledged themselves to the Imperium after Arbor and Moore. They had received only about 100 new armors. That's less than one per year from Mezua. Again, due to like the really god-awful warp turbulence, armors arrive in groups via explorer cruisers instead of the larger arcs because the Zoans don't want to risk arcs in the region. So even worse, again, after bonding with those armors, the Maccabeus Scions immediately leave to join the Crusade. When Markham shows back up, there are barely 24 knights left at the garrison. So, when Markham returns, becomes the Lord Protector, Baroda straight up cuts its ties with Zoa. They're not fans already because they're seen as being underappreciated, and really, Mazoa seems to have been nothing but condescending to them. They only barely kind of fulfill their end of the bargain. Instead, they start relying on the supply lines of the War Master, and in just a few months after Markin gets home, their ranks have increased to over 200 knight armors and a full host of retainers and support war machine. So that's in 150 years, they got 100 armors from Mezua, but in just several months, Horus doubles. So, of course, these supplies can neither be confirmed nor denied in where they came from, but several convoys of armor bound for Demetus 2 and 3 inexplicably vanish immediately prior to Istvan 3.
Huh.
So, that is the sad story of House Maccabeus in more or less its entirety.
I mean, is it really all that sad? Because, I mean, their knights eventually did, or at least the youngsters who were pissed off that they had to stay home, got to go out and fight Horus's war. Granted, it was with the Death Guard, which is less than favorable.
Yeah, until they were eventually, worn down and essentially discarded as resources when they were used up by the Death Guard. Other than that, yeah, it's all strawberries.
Yeah, lots of scrap metal strawberries.
Absolutely.
I love the image of a steampunk knight like fighting another steampunk knight on this totally, backwards world of Baroda, and if anyone models something like that, which would be amazing. This diesel engine powered knight with like a lance that's like, bolted on or tied on. That would just be super cool for me to see.
Is it bad that, like, Jason, when you started talking about the knights being like scrapped together and running diesel, like I automatically thought of like a semi truck with a knight chassis on it? Like that's all I could think of for some reason.
Like somebody had just welded parts of Optimus Prime onto it.
Exactly. Or like just like instead of the Knight Scion cabin, it's just like the front end, or it's like the cab of a semi. And whenever they go into battle, there isn't war horns. It's legitimately just an air horn.
100% positive that is exactly how it happened.
Yeah. Well, I think House Veroni is a perfect follow-up for Maccabeus because of their hate for each other, although unable to actually attack each other.
Oh yeah, they're like the spoiled rich kids to Maccabeus's like, sad little cobbled together knights.
Well, you say that, but House Veroni. So, I'll go into it. So House Veroni is from a Night World, as Jason already mentioned, Damatus 3 and 2, and they were loyalists, or they went loyalist, but essentially when they first colonized Damatus 3 and 2, it was ruled by, the way they describe it in the Black Books is chthonic life forms, which were essentially giants, and had the ability to communicate, and essentially demanded that the settlers of House Veroni to swear fealty to them and let them devour them and pay tithes and whatnot. And so they spent years fighting these giant creatures, but eventually killed them. And that's actually how they got their nickname, which is God Eaters, because these beings on Damodus 3 and 2 were meant to be like the size of knights or even bigger, the size of reavers almost. But then during like Old Night, they dealt with constant attacks from Eldar and orcs, and then I think we talked briefly about this in our Corn to Deep section about the Mitu conglomerate, which was a host of Xenos that essentially tried to have control of the Corn to Deeps, and try as they might, Veroni, or try as they might to subjugate Veroni, they kept on fighting and kept on fighting and kept on fighting until Veroni was completely exhausted of all resources and just expecting their doom. And it never came. Eventually, a single craft landed on their homeworld, and it was a Stormbird of the First Legion, essentially just one of the exploratory exploratory fleets, and led by the Dark Angels, saying, "Hey, we found you. You're now with us." But one of the things I found interesting about their homeworld is that their main hub or city is called Fellwether Keep, and it's actually built out of their exploratory arc, which I thought was really, really cool. Because at least with House Airthane, you know, they don't talk about like their exploratory arc or anything like that. Essentially, all you know is that their homeworld was shattered into like 100 pieces, that kind of thing. Let's see. So once they become part of the Great Crusade, Scions start leaving the world, or a group of Scions goes with the Dark Angels and leaves the world. And that group of Scions, as well as future groups of Scions, serve actually under multiple different specific groups. First under the Dark Angels that found them, then the Word Bearers, and then they wind up with the Imperial Fists. And I'm kind of wondering if they don't mention it in the book, but if the Imperial Fists they serve under are the same Imperial Fists that then found Maccabeus, or something to that effect, which would be interesting.
Hey Pat, there's actually an interesting reference on page 50 in the Adeptus Titanicus rulebook.
Yeah.
So there is a banner, the Questoris Knight banner Parasina, and they are in defense of Legio Defensor. And Legio Defensor was at the Second Battle of Paramar. And if you guys know your heresy history, who else was at the Battle of Paramar? Okay, I'm pretty sure the Imperial Fists were there.
I was going to let Jason answer it, but yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think
promise I know things.
So yeah, so that definitely confirms that, you know, House Veroni was with the Imperial Fists during the Crusade.
Yeah. I did find it interesting that in one regard, Veroni is actually kind of an opposite to Maccabeus in the fact that all of their scions and their entire noble house, and actually even the people that live on Damodus 3 and 2, are in a constant state of like sorrow and being withdrawn. And it's like something within their bloodline. The way they describe it is, let's see, the nobles of House Veroni are noted for their unique sorrowful Maine, a manor born of the knowledge that their ancestors' 5,000-year vigil against the terrors of old night might be rendered utterly meaningless or obliterated entirely at the hands of a warrior who was at one time the emperor's most beloved son. So like they're constantly in a state of melancholy, which I thought was interesting. But even though Jason mentions, or Jason said before that they're like the rich kids to House Maccabeus, the thing is that at their height they only had about 100 knights, and by the end, or by the time the Dark Angels find them, or by the time the Dark Angels find them, they are essentially worn down to their last couple of knights. No more supplies, no nothing else. And even though they're supplied a little bit, it takes until year 5.M31 for their Grand Master to even say, yes, I want to be bonded to a Forge World in order to get resupplied with new knight armors. So if you think about it, Maccabeus had newer armors before Veroni even did.
Ah, that's weird.
Yeah, and the thing is that Veroni, being a loyalist house, made the wrong decision. They decided with Cyclothrace.
They made the wrong decision being loyalists.
Being loyalist, yes. Sorry,
I mean,
thank you.
Obviously.
I mean, I'm a traitor at heart, but I enjoy their story. And so Grandmaster Jock, J-A-K, essentially recalls all of his knights back to the homeworld in order for the act of bonding with Cyclothrace, because they're expecting a delegation from Cyclothrace to come, saying, "Hey, here's all our knights. Here are your new chassis. This is fantastic. You'll now be with us. Congratulations." And so they're waiting and expecting high magoses from Cyclothrace, as well as some knights from House Earthane to show up. But before they do, the eldest son of the Grand Master essentially crash lands into Damatus 3 and 2 and says betrayal, because he has just come from Istvan and essentially knows what's happening, knows that Horus turned. And so instead of being caught in a trap with Cyclothrace and Earthane, they now know exactly what's coming, and they fight off the ambush, but the Grandmaster dies while fighting to a Cyclothrathian knight, Octalier, which Jason, you may know more about that than I do, but the name does not sound familiar to me.
I'm just as clueless as you are in this respect.
Okay, but essentially, so the Grandmaster is killed. His son is mortally wounded, and they are just kind of forced into a rough spot where they have to resupply, or else they'll die. They have to swear fealty to somebody who's not Cyclothrace, and so they go with Mezua. And being that Damatus 3 and 2 is not in the middle of a warp storm, Mezua is going to supply them. And because of Roni's choice to maintain their loyalty to the Emperor and to the Imperial Truth, Mezua gives the Grandmaster's son, Geos, who's mortally wounded, a Majera chassis knight, but it's actually a very special Majera chassis knight, because essentially it's a giant dreadnought. Because he is so mortally wounded, he is locked inside in like a almost like MIU sarcophagus kind of thing inside his knight chassis, which I thought was interesting. And I thought you might find that interesting too, Dave, just because we talked about
that's
thrones.
It's an interesting idea, right? So, I mean, I know with Titans, you can get sort of interred, right? So you can get
Right.
put into a pod and, filled with amniotic sort of fluid. And then you're, basically permanently connected to the Titan through the MIU. And you're permanently connected to sort of this artificial reality. I didn't know you could do that with knights. So that to me, that's really the first time I've heard that you could do something like that with a knight. I think it's a really interesting idea, especially since we kind of know the throne mechanicum has to come out of the knight chassis, the knight armor, when it's not being piloted. So the throne mechanicum does not stay in the knight armor. That's really interesting.
Yeah, so it's actually in material strength on page 117. I think it's like the very bottom of the first paragraph in that section. It says, the armor's artificer wrought system not only saved his life, but rendered him all but immortal in a manner not unlike a hero of the Legiones Astartes, interred within the sarcophagus of a dreadnought. And that kind of makes me think that maybe, like, legitimately he just rules out of his knight, and maybe he has to sleep occasionally, like how dreadnoughts need to sleep or else they'll go insane.
Yeah, no, that does make it sound like it's more like a sarcophagus, right? Like a dreadnought than a Titan. But that's pretty cool.
Yeah, but I mean, in the same regard, like it being a dreadnought, like a sarcophagus, maybe they can pull the sarcophagus out. But yeah, no, I thought that was really cool. And then, of course, they have these beautiful depictions of knights. The first one is Christora's Knight Paladin Artemisia. At the outbreak of the war in the Corona Deeps, Artemisia was deployed to the 12th moon of Sargathi X, or 10, to support the 1233rd cohort of the Solar Auxilia in suppression against Xeno raiders. Despite suffering significant casualties in their routine routing of the Reaver warband, the entire force was recalled to Manichaea, where Artemisia took part in the defense of Hive Olaine. So that's fun. And then there's plenty more heraldry for your project there, Dave.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff, man. I definitely want to get on that. My favorite House Veroni knight, though, is on the next page, on page 120, the Cerastus Knight Lancer Opsinthos,
Absinthos, maybe?
Yeah.
Absinthos? Yeah. Hey, listeners, if you know how to pronounce it correctly, send us an audio blurb.
Absinthos. Yeah. I think maybe Absinthos. But yeah, we talked about her, actually.
Oh,
We talked about her very early on in our coverage of the Corn and Deeps, because Scion Elsbeth Vor was one of the knights that took out the Tempestus Reaver, Roxvalion, at Hive Ilium. So,
which is so freaking cool.
Oh man, I mean, having played Adeptus Titanicus, sort of, I think, as much as Jason and I have, Pat, and I know you've played a little bit too. Like, just the idea of a knight lancer taking down a reaver. I mean, it's as good as it gets, man. You know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, and I mean that kind of harkens back to when I was reading Vengeful Spirit. Spoilers, by the way. If you haven't read Vengeful Spirit, I don't know why you're even listening to us. Go read Vengeful Spirit. But there's a whole night house on Moloch that essentially, like, takes out a warlord, and it's a bunch of Ceresis Lancers. I'm trying to remember the name, though.
Emperor Titan.
Oh yeah, it's an Imperator Titan.
Oh, sorry, it's an Imperator Titan, so it's even bigger and even better.
And we're gonna get We're gonna get Moloch, right? We're gonna get the next campaign book for Adeptus Titanicus is Moloch.
Oh,
and so we are gonna get. I mean, I can only imagine we're gonna get rules for House Divine, right?
I certainly hope so.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're on the cover. Certainly, speculation is that they're on the cover. So yeah, that'll be really cool. It would be really cool to see if there's a mechanic where knights can basically do what they did in Vengeful Spirit, sort of combine their firepower into like a super powerful, combined strike. I would love to see that mechanic on the table.
That would be cool. And I guess one of the cool things about House Divine is you could technically run them as both Loyalist and Traitor.
Yeah. Poor, who was it, Jason? Was it Albred, or Albrecht? What's the guy's name?
Albard,
yeah. He's my favorite.
That name alone.
I love that.
It's better than Raven Divine.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah, that's true. But I guess to end House Veroni on a high note, I will say that out of all of the Loyalist Knight houses, they're probably one of my favorites. Not only by like how they're like the emo goths of the Loyalist Knight houses, but also I'm absolutely in love with their crest. That essentially a skeleton wearing a crown with lightning bolts coming out of it. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, they do have some pretty badass hair.
And I mean, the fact that they've named themselves God Eaters, which is pretty cool, just because of all the monsters that they had to deal with in order to even colonize where they are.
I have one small correction to make before our listeners just totally call me out on Facebook. The second battle of Paramar was, in fact, not fought with the Imperial Fist. It was fought with the Blood Angels and the White Scars. I was confusing Paramar with Fall. So apologies. I will let you know if House Veroni was at Fall, but it probably was. I'd go out on a limb and say it was.
Don't worry, listeners. We'll beat him later. Yeah. But I mean, this is, I guess, to end it on a high note, this has been a lot of fun. It's awesome to look at the pictures, but then to also like get really deep into the lore of these night houses has been fantastic. And don't worry, listeners, we'll certainly be coming back to nights. I guarantee it. But yeah, it's been fantastic. Dave, Jason, you guys have anything else to
add? Just remember, to all of the Adeptus Titanicus players out there, Titans may be cool and everything, but it's a knight's world. Titans just play in it.
This coming from the guy who has 43 of them.
48.
48, sorry.
How would I even get 43? That's such an odd number.
I don't know. Now if you paint them all. Sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, this has been really fun. I think, I don't know where we're going next. I'm not sure we've decided, but the next episode we do, we'll let you know, and we'll give you guys a little bit of a break, a little bit of an introduction, and we'll give you a little syllabus so you know where we're headed for the next few episodes. I don't think we've decided, Jason, have we? Do you know?
I don't think so. I think we got as far as discussing like a sort of kind of like a refresher episode, maybe like a one-off or something.
Oh yeah, we could do that. Definitely do that.
I think that's as far as we got.
I think there was a couple things in the Cornet Deeps that we wanted to go back and touch on for an episode and then come back, if I remember correctly. But regardless, thanks for listening, guys. I will, real quick as a plug, if you haven't already and you're on the eastern seaboard of the U.S., come out to the go buy your tickets for the Nova Open. It's coming up end of August. I know it's only March right now, but it's still coming up, and tickets are going off the shelves. I know I'll be there. Dave will be there. Jason will be there. A whole lot of the Remembrancers Retreat cast is going to be there. And you can find us playing Heresy, going to events, and having a good time. We're actually going to be sponsoring a pub night or a keg night Wednesday night, the first night of the the convention, but come out, say hi, and come play some awesome games, or go to some awesome seminars. I know my first time to Nova was last year, and I had a blast. It was fantastic. So that's my plug.
Yeah, it's a good time. Come say hi.
Yeah, we won't bite. At least I don't think we won't. But yeah, I guess if that's it, Dave, Jason, listeners, hope you've enjoyed. And guess we'll just tell Craig to fuck off.
Fuck right off, Craig.
We really need to get a shirt that like says "fuck off, Craig." We really, and like Craig's picture, a shirt that says "fuck off, Craig," and then like maybe Heresy School. That would be perfect.
Of course, listeners, tell us. Do you want the shirt?